morning, ladies and gentlemen. I have never arrived on the stages today because plane landed half an hour ago, but it ended nicely. So I'm really pleased to have this possibility to share with you some of the thoughts which I think are important for our future, and I would in particular like to thank Professor Hauser for inviting me, and I do appreciate that a lot. The structure of my presentation will be first the world we live in and the challenges we are facing, then sustainable development goals and the role of sustainable consumption and production, economic model driving our lives, resource management from the recent International Resource Panel reports, which I'm co-chairing. This is United Nations panel, which is approximately the same as IPCC, which is more known in the climate change, as you know. Then the role of the circular economy. Finally, about the leadership and governance, and then some thoughts for concluding the session. First, about the challenges we are facing and the world in which we are living. Whenever you will see I see on the screen the things are moving. That's great. Whenever you will see on the left and on the right screen side these signs of UN Environment and International Resource Panel, it means that those data are based on the research which was done by us. 20th century was the century of the great acceleration. The growth of population was by a factor of 3.7. Annual extraction of construction materials grew by a factor of 34. Ores and minerals by a factor 27. Fossil fuels by a factor of 12, biomass by a factor of 3.6. At average, the total material extraction grew by a factor of 8, and greenhouse gas emissions by the factor of 13. This resulted in something which was very nicely presented by Stockholm Resilience Institute when they were explaining the planetary boundaries, that in two areas we are already beyond the zone of uncertainty in the high risk. That's how we manage phosphorus and nitrogen fertilizers, and in the area of disappearing biodiversity, while in two areas, in the land system change and in the climate change, we are in the zone of uncertainty with increasing risks. If you would think thoroughly, all four areas are very closely connected to the way how we produce food, how we manage the food systems. And this will be in the future pretty much decisive how sustainably we will live. But let us taste the 21st century. We have all got used to the figure that we will be 9.7 billion in the mid of the century. What does that mean if I translate it to the human language? It means that in one generation we will have on the planet additionally 2.5 billion people. The overall amount of population at the beginning of the 20th century was 1.4 billion. It means that in 1 year we have on the planet additional Germany. In 4 years you have on the planet additional United States of America. In 9 days and 6 hours you have on the planet my country, which is obviously a bit small, Slovenia. All that is happening in least developed part of the world. So they will be growing faster than actually the developed part of the world, which is natural because they have to catch up with us, which means that the pressure on the resource use will be even stronger. 62 people own the same as half of the world. The richest 1% is more wealthy than the rest of the world. Nearly 800 million people are hungry. Over 2 billion suffer from micronutrient deficiencies, while over 2 billion people are obese. We throw away 1/3 of the food which we produce. Environment. As you know, there is an increasing evidence of the climate threat. 60% of the ecosystems are already today degraded or used unsustainably. More than 85% of the world's fisheries are at or beyond their biological limits. 1/3 of the soils is degraded due to various reasons. Almost 500,000 of people in Europe die prematurely due to the air pollution, which is approximately 15 times more than due to the car accidents. And 1 million of plastic bottles are bought every minute globally. In 2015, only 9% was recycled. 12 incinerated and 79 accumulated on landfills and in the environment. Urbanization. Globally, an area of the size of the United Kingdom has been converted to buildings since 1990. More than 50% of the urban fabric cities which will be existing in 2050 are not yet built. And China has, in the 3 years period, 2011 to 13, used more cement than the United States of America in the whole 20th century when they were building all the towns in the United States. Nearly half of all work we do will be able to be automated by the year 2055, according to the McKinsey estimates. And this is the particularly important fact: for the first time in the human history, we are living in a tightly coupled human socio-ecological system of planetary scope. So we are more interconnected and interdependent than ever, which means that our responsibility, individual and also collective, has enormously increased. I very much like this quote from Synchronous Failure. In a world where external reserves of resources are limited and second chances are thus increasingly rare, humankind must develop the ability to proactively navigate away from this new kind of crisis, globally extensive, intersystemic, that could otherwise irreversibly degrade the biophysical and economic basis for the human prosperity. Let us now very shortly focus on the Sustainable Development Goals. I assume you all know them. It's a kind of new social contract which we have all together, all nations, adopted something like 2 years ago. One important fact which we have discovered in our research work in International Resource Panel is that, of course, the trade-offs among various SDGs are unavoidable. But sustainable consumption and production is the most efficient strategy to avoid these trade-offs and create synergy to resolve those questions. So if you would ask me on which of those targets I would focus in the first place, it's on the responsible consumption and production. Because you can just dream about eradicating poverty, zero hunger, and I can continue if we do not fundamentally change the economic models in which we are living. Let us look to the economic models which are driving our lives. This will be a bit simplified story, but easy to understand. It's not far from the truth. Price signals which we are sending on the market. Financial capital overvalued, human capital undervalued, and natural capital to a large extent not valued at all. On the market you have then producers, consumers, which behave rationally, and of course the prices are deciding the quantities, and at the end we are surprised that we live in an economic model which has inbuilt economic, social and environmental imbalances. It's one of the important facts which we have discovered from the IRP is that in the midterm, except in specific cases, resource shortage will not be the core limiting factor of our economic development. But the environmental and health consequences caused by this excessive and irresponsible use of resources will be. It means that it will not be the shortage of steel which will stop the development in the Chinese cities, but it will be actually the air quality which will request major changes in the approach, also in the approach of their political leadership. So, in essence, you need to focus your development on the biosphere, which is determining your possibility for development. The whole society is then depending on that, and of course economy is the top of that. When I was Commissioner for Environment, I was basically 5 years fighting that economic, social and environmental would be considered as equal. In essence, if I'm frank, this is wrong, because the way how we would need to shape it is that all socio-technical systems which are providing us social needs and value depends on the ecosystems, depends on the home which is hosting us. This is the same picture which you see. It's a bit more complex. It was produced by the European Environment Agency. The major problem which we actually see in this is that is connected to environmental externalities. Let me explain to you what are environmental externalities. Here, on the top side, you have of the profits of selected sectors, which, as you can see, are all green, when you do not take into account the cost of natural capital. And below the line, you see when you take the natural capital into account. So some of our sectors are today actually functioning in a way that they are in a loss, or we as society are in a loss. But we simply show, because we do not take those costs which are existing as part of the actual costs which we are covering, we actually show that they are on the positive side. One thing which is pretty shocking in the report which was 2 months ago published by OECD, OECD countries has in the years 2010-2014 increased fossil fuel subsidies more than it was their GDP growth. In the time when all those countries, which are by the way wealthy, talk how we have to tackle the climate change. This is the signal which is sending us just in the opposite way. So if you look different measures of societal development, more do you include the natural capital if you move from gross domestic product to human development index, genuine progress indicator, inclusive wealth index, you find out that actually we are growing, if I can say so, slower than in reality are. So one thing when we talk about economic development, which we need to be clear, we actually don't know how much of the growth in the past could be qualified as growth, and how much of that growth was in essence bad growth. We are, as policymakers, constantly focusing on growth rates like they would be the most important thing. The most important thing is the level of GDP which you have achieved. You do not go to the shop and say, I'm growing 5%, please give me that and that. You go there by the actual money which you have in your pocket, which depends on the level which we have achieved. We are too much focusing on flows, not enough on stocks. While we have in Europe clear rules that we should not indebt our societies financially, we have no rules that we should not indebt ourselves when it comes to the environmental questions. And finally, do not forget, if somebody is growing 10%, it means that everything what you are producing and consuming is doubling in 7 years. Or if I revert, if you are growing 7 years, 7%, everything is doubling in 10 years. This is, by the way, exactly the growth rate which China is currently achieving. So it is not helping if you are walking faster, if you are walking in the wrong direction. And I think this is a bit the message which I would like that it stays with you when we talk about the economic systems. Now about resource management, which were analyzed in our recent International Resource Panel reports. I will focus predominantly on 2 of them. Our philosophy, which is behind the work which we are doing, is that human well-being can grow faster than economic activity. But economic activity should definitely not be connected entirely to the resource use and growth. So we should decouple resource use from the growth. And what is important is that both economic activity and also resource use are decoupled from environmental impacts. So we have 2 types of decoupling. One is resource decoupling, and another is the impact decoupling. Some of the conclusions from the material flows and resource productivity of the database which we handle, it's 1970, 2010. Now we have even to 2017, but it doesn't matter. Consumption has been stronger driver of growth in material use than population growth in the last 40 years. The richest countries consume on average 10 times more materials as the poorest countries. It is interesting that resource productivity, which is actually how much resources per the unit of GDP we are using, has from the year 2000 decreased even if in all the countries has practically increased. But what is the reason for that? Structural change. More of the production is moving from the countries which are resource efficient, like Europe, Japan, to the countries which are less resource efficient, like China and India. And finally, the level of well-being achieved in wealthy industrial countries cannot be generalized globally based on the same system of production and consumption. This could be the best explained in this slide, which you see ahead of you. On the horizontal X, it's a human development index. So more right you are, more developed you are. On the vertical X, it's environmental footprint. Higher you are, higher is your footprint. The dots are the countries. And the dots which are surrounded red, you can find them in the red-hand side of the corner, are actually European Union member states. The green corner on the right-hand side, bottom, contains all the countries where people are living well within the planetary boundaries. So currently, none of the countries in the world is living in that conditions. The reason for that is that in the development, we all move first up, and when we face the problems, we start to move down. It is very much in the hands of the developed part of the world that we show that we are ready and able to move down. We are also those who are mastering technologies, knowledge, and we have to share it with those who are currently in this position and would need to leapfrog, not going like that, but rather going like that. By the way, they cannot go like that because it's physically impossible. There are no such resources which would allow that kind of a development. So if we are sincere in developing sustainable development goals of eradicating poverty, we have no other option than to show that we can do the things in the future in a different way. We have done also the research on the realizing the resource efficiency potential. Conclusions are that with concerted action, there is a significant potential for increasing resource efficiency, that markets will not achieve higher rates of resource efficiency by themselves. Public policy and political will be needed. There are significant barriers to the increases in resource efficiency required, but they can be removed. And finally, improving resource efficiency, it's indispensable for meeting climate change targets cost effectively. So we have done some modeling where we compared 4 types of scenarios. One was the existing trends, so business as usual. One was only using climate policies. One was using only resource efficiency policies, and one was using those policies combined. And first, we look to the effects on the global resource use, domestic material consumption. And I will not go into details, just to explain you that if you combine both policies, you basically get much better results than with individual policies, which is more or less the current approach. The same is the story also when it comes to the influence on the greenhouse gases. So yes, you can get best results with the climate policy activities, but if you take also resource efficiency, you can improve that activities. And most importantly is that if you would use only the climate policies, actually you have a danger of having negative economic impact. While if you combine it with the resource efficiency policies, you immediately get also positive economic impacts, which is of course preferable. So one of the problems which we are facing is that not everything which is resource efficient is also economically efficient because of the externalities which I explained to you before. Because the tax policy which we are using, it's in many cases wrongly designed. Because we should support other incentives for actors to favor paying for labor to save materials rather than for materials to save the labor, which is currently the approach we are using. This is a bit better picture, more optimistic, because it's showing you where the innovation goes, and all which are in the green area are investing more in environmental technologies than at average in all the technologies. Here you have average, and here you have environmental technologies. By the way, Poland is pretty in a good position if we look those kind of indicators. I'm just showing you to give the message that understanding that this is important, it's increasing. Now let's move to the role of the circular economy. Circular economy, on the left-hand side you have biotic resources, renewable resources. On the right side you have the abiotic resources, materials. The whole idea of the circular economy is that you keep various types of resources in the production and consumption cycle as long as possible, and to keep their value as high as possible. You can do it by designing the product differently, you can do it by different consumption habits, you can do it by different business models, you can do it by differently organizing production systems. This is absolutely the thing which producers can decide, but it's important to have that kind of a mind and approach when dealing with that. And it is essential that it is human-centric, that we put humans in the center, because if we don't do that, if we do not create a system which will at the same time have the possibility to eradicate also the poverty, we will lose the developing part of the world, and the concept will become another Western type of the models which will not be able to be shared also in the developing part of the world. One concept which is also interesting is the concept of the bioeconomy, which I'm sure you know what it is. In essence, if you want to connect it to the circular economy, it means that you have to move some of the products which are currently material-based, so technically produced, to be produced by renewable materials. The only thing which is important is that also when you produce it in a renewable way, you use the renewable resources in a sustainable way. So biofuels were not a good story if we talk about that. And finally, we need to connect the climate story also to the circular economy story. It's not enough, as we are currently doing, that we are focusing only on carbon management and greenhouse gases. It's extremely important that we connect that also to the land management, water management, materials management, and have the overall approach, because this is in essence what one can call low carbon resource efficient economy. And this is something which is pretty much missing in our policies. Finally, about the leadership and governance, because I firmly believe that without the leadership and governance, we will not reach far. This will be some quotes which I like most and I think are very well explaining the situation in which we are. We face a host of systemic challenges beyond the reach of existing institutions and their hierarchical authority structures. Problems like climate change, destruction of ecosystems, growing scarcity of water, youth unemployment, embedded poverty and inequity require unprecedented collaboration among different organizations, sectors, and even countries. We have a bit of problem. Yeah. So we are at the beginning of the beginning, how to catalyze and guide systemic change at a scale commensurate with the scale of the problems we face and all of us see but dimly. Second is from the, at last, liberals awaking from a long dream. The fact that Western elites awaking from their dream of the end of the history may actually increase our chances of confronting global problems successfully. Part of that dream was the notion that these elites know best what is good for the humanity. The coming years might well be characterized by intense soul-searching and by attempts to formulate new social and political visions. This is the quote from Stephen Hawking when he was analyzing the results of Brexit and also elections in the United States. This was a cry of anger of people who felt they have been abandoned by their leaders. What matters now, far more than choices made by these two electorates, is how these elites react. Should we in turn reject these votes as outpourings of crude populism that fail to take account of facts and attempt to circumvent and circumscribe the choices that they represent? This would be a terrible mistake. The concerns underlying these votes about the economic consequences of globalization and accelerating technological change are absolutely understandable. We are living in a world of widening, not diminishing financial inequality, in which many people can see not just their standard of living, but their ability to earn a living at all disappearing. So, what are the three core capabilities that system leaders develop in order to foster a collective leadership? First, helping people to see the larger system and build a shared understanding of complex problems. Second, fostering reflection and more generative conversations. And third, shifting the collective focus from reactive problem solving to co-creating the future. You can ask yourself how many of our political leaders actually fit in that kind of logic and thinking. Now about the governance. Government should be structured around the problems, so integrating the policies. For example, Minister of Agriculture cannot solve the problem of the food system change. We need to move policy from innovative parts to innovative wholes. Many innovative parts do not create innovative wholes, and no one in the government is looking at the big picture. I was 10 years in national politics in Slovenia. I was 10 years in European politics, and I can guarantee you that that's truth. Administrative endeavor should be changed to a creative endeavor. What is the danger of administrative approach? That you change the wrong things to an ideal state, but they are still wrong. Embedding a new capability, engaging everybody under ownership is crucial. We should replace the complainants boxes with ideas boxes. We should aim at impossible projects and force ourselves to rethink the principles. So what is needed is a new structure, a new logic, a new culture, and a kind of new social contract. About the governance, we have globalized economy, globalized trade, globalized internet, globalized transport. You can name it. While we are all wanting to keep a lot of responsibility for the decisions nationally. And this will have a bit of problem if we want really to govern the world. Europe 70 years ago decided that we will give up some of our responsibility, sovereignty, and give it on a higher level with only one reason: to avoid conflicts and wars. And we were successful. And pretty much the world is standing in front of the same challenge as Europe was standing 70 years ago. But it really depends either we will be able to move or not. Probably this is really difficult to manage, but I will try to manage it till the end. To conclude, sustainable development, low carbon development, circle development, resource efficient development, energy efficient development, decoupling of resources, free arts, ecological civilization, which is a Chinese expression, cradle to cradle, bioeconomy, eco-economy, blue economy, all that are things which we are using in policy approach. What we actually want to say is that new economic model based on sustainable consumption and production, integrating all pillars of sustainability, it's necessary and it's actually unavoidable. We are trying to say that we have to fix a broken compass. Main points which I would like that you would remember. For the first time in human history, we face emergence of a tightly coupled human socio-ecological system of planetary scope. It is about system change. Without leadership and improved global governance, SDGs are only a wishful thinking. Transition to a new economic model, integrating all pillars of sustainability, should be in the center of our attention. Trade-offs among various SDGs are unavoidable. Sustainable consumption and production is the most efficient strategy to avoid them and create synergies, and circular economy, it's a very good concept to operationalize that in practice. We should refocus our efforts from addressing, here it's the mistake, it shouldn't be pressures, it should be states and impacts, because all our policy currently it's focusing on migration security. We should rather refocus on the pressures and drivers, the reasons which are causing migration, the reasons which are causing that we are living in more insecure situation that we did decades ago. So focusing on social, economic, and environmental instabilities. Implementing SDGs should be the priority of the government, included in the strategic documents, supported by indicators, monitoring, reporting, and linked to the core economic policy decisions. All economic policies should be systematically adjusted. Synergies among climate change, bioeconomy, and resource management, circular economy should be exploited. All levels, global, European, national, and local, and all stakeholders, public, private, financial sector, civil society, academia, should actively participate in the system change. Active dialogue with potential losers is necessary to make the transition fair and also possible. European Union is the best global governance pilot, an enormous wealth of good and bad examples in practice, but there is a need for a clear vision and leadership, which is currently lacking. Change will not appear by waiting for the leadership of others. Be the leaders on your level of governance and authority in politics, in business, in academia, in making your investment decisions. If we are to avoid globally extensive and intersystemic crises and frequent conflicts, let's get serious about implementing what we have agreed in Sustainable Development Goals. Changes are unavoidable, and humans are supposed to be intelligent. It is high time to prove it. Some are saying that this is pretty much the story of gloom and doom. I do not agree. I think that any global transition is a major new opportunity for the innovation, for new development, for new jobs, and alternative, I would rather not think and talk about it, because I do believe that it is the story of gloom and doom. Let me finish with 3 quotes from somebody you certainly know, and are very well explaining the situation in which we are living and the difficulties which are ahead of us. The first quote from Albert Einstein is, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we have created them." Second, insanity is doing the same things over and over again and expecting different results. And the last one, when Einstein was asked why it is that mankind has stretched so far as to discover the structure of the atom, but we have not been able to devise the political means to keep the atom from destroying us, he replied, "This is simple, my friend, it is because politics is more difficult than physics." Yes, this is more or less the story of physics. And unfortunately, it's difficult to go against the physical laws, as you know. But we will need a lot of political will to master it. Some are saying that this is the story for the future, but my message to you would be, unfortunately, the future has already arrived. It is called present. That would be all. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Dr. Janez Potočnik, former European Union Commissioner for Science and Research and for the Environment, and a co-chair of the UNEP International Resource Panel. Thank you.